Hi there, people. My name's Jamie Boyle. I'm the author of many of the Paul Sykes books, and I'd like to talk about that book, Sweet Agony. Sweet Agony first was put together by Paul Sykes around 1985 when he was in Durham prison. Finished the book 1988. Yeah, I got it from good authority that the only reason he actually started the English class in Durham prison was he took a fancy to one of the male teachers, and the book took Paul 3 years to write. The book starts from March 1977 to when he's just about to regain his liberty, and it finishes in the dressing rooms at Wembley Arena, June 1979. So the book is written all in the time of about 2 months, 3 months, something like that. When I first read it, I watched the documentary and I was absolutely intrigued, blown away, as many of you lot were. The documentary came out on December the 4th, 1990, but it was made in 1988, 1989. I met up with Roger Greenwood and Nick Lord, the producer of Yorkshire Television there, so they told me all about it. And yeah, it was, I watched the documentary and I was just like, wow, who is that guy? I need to know more. At the time, Warcry Publishing had never relaunched it, so the original, which is what we've used on the thumbprint for this cover, I mean, back at the day, back in, when was it released? December the 4th? No, sorry. So it was made in 88. Paul got out of prison in September 89, the 11th. So he started selling them about 1990, and it was £3.99 then. And yeah, so Warcry Publishing came along in 2015 and made the book Reborn, because, to be quite honest, up until we brought it back to life, it was like literally as rare as rock and horse shit. I've seen books on eBay for as much as £300. When I bought one, I kind of, July, about the summer 2012, I was just like, right, I watched a documentary, so now I want to know what this book was about. So I managed to get one, I think, for about £45, which was really cheap in them days. Read it, and if you want to know my truth, I was really, really disappointed, because I watched a documentary and I knew he died. I knew he declined and, you know, became a bit of a joke, and kind of the bully became the bullied in the end of it all. But I wanted to know what happened. You know, it's almost like on a stroke of midnight when Cinderella, you know, it was just like, and that's what Paul Sykes was like. He was this big monster of a man. And when at the turn of around the millennium, he just kind of, you know, he lost this aura of menace, of what's the word? He wasn't as invincible, down to, you know, drink, drug abuse, not looking after himself, sleeping rough, his arthritis caught with him, all this kind of thing. And I watched a documentary and bought the book. And in actual fact, another documentary was mainly made in 1989 and 1990. Like, say for instance, the boxing scene was on Paul's 44th birthday, so that'll have been May the 23rd, 1990. So that just shows you the time scale for the documentary. So I wanted to know what happened to him, and I read the book, and basically the book if anything, only talks about Paul's life from 1977 to 79. So didn't really answer any questions. So I suppose I kind of, for 3 years I spoke to many authors. I said, what about writing a book on Paul Sykes? Because I'd love to read it. And obviously I grew up most of my life in Middlesbrough, so I was very familiar with the Spenceleys, who Paul talks about. Tony, he speaks about them in great love. In the book himself, he says something like, I'd never been to Middlesbrough before, apart from being in a prison. And when I got there, the grey skies and the ICI, and I thought, what a fucking dump. And it turns out, he said, it was one of the best weeks of his life. And I think that was why he was always, Middlesbrough was kind of like his second home. And anyway, so the book itself, I was disappointed. And so that was 2012. And then I read it again in about November 2015. I actually borrowed the copy off Paul's only sibling, Kay. And then I read it and I realised for what it was. It was a piece of genius. It was almost like, sometimes, my wife, when I write my book, she kind of, when she proofreads them, she's like, Jamie, you're trying to put detail on top of detail. And Paul talks about smells and colours, and he's very expressive in his ways. So there's a lot of one-liners. The book, if you've watched the documentary, it's littered with one-liners, what they like doing on calf, and and I've told you my statutory light and all these kind of sayings. Delroy showers, I feel like a larger gooseberry. We can go on and on, sat there like a drip, and all these kind of things. But the book is actually littered with a lot of Paul Sykes, how can I put it, unique wisdom. And the book itself, let's be honest, right, is, excuse me, it's based on, I think it's 12 chapters. Let me just double check. 8. Hang on, 8, is it? I thought it was more than that. But, I mean, obviously they're quite lengthy chapters. And again, he does go into detail. The 8 chapters, I'm very surprised. So the book is, I'm not gonna spoil it for anyone, because anyone who hasn't read it, it's, I mean, obviously people now know Western Edge Pictures have came and they've got the Inquired. And when my boss said, Jamie, Western Edge Pictures, who made the what did they make? They're doing a Paul Gascoigne documentary now. They're doing they've done Oscar Pistorius, they've done the Joe Calzaghe. He basically got in touch and he said, you never guess what? He said, these people want to come and they came for Sweet Agony, but at the time I'd done Unfinished Agony, Further Agony, and obviously Final Agony. So what they want to do, what the plan is, to merge the 4 books together. The script has been written by Vaughan Civil and Leo Bill. Western Edge announced this to the world last year. I'd probably known, what year are we on now? I'd probably known 2 years before that. And a lot of people who were told were like, yeah, right, oh, so why isn't it? This is nothing compared, films that do take a long time. And the book, I'm going to be honest, it's controversial. It's disturbing. Listen, I'm not condemning it. But in 1977, when you're a 30-year-old man and you've got 2 15-year-olds fighting over you, which went on to be Paul's second and third wife, then yeah, it was, obviously these days you'd be stoned to death and you'd just be an out-and-out paedophile, and it's listen. I wasn't around, but I spoke to people. Who were around, who watched what went on with Wendy and Kath. I'm allowed to say the names because the names are in the book. Obviously, I didn't for my book, Final Agony, for legal reasons, but it's there in print. It's there in black and white. Paul written it, I didn't. And it's a tale of a man who has basically been in prison all his life. A statistic I'll give you is from the age of 17 to 30. Nearly 31 actually. He'd spent 9 months at large. He'd basically had his liberty for 9 months. So in the book, he describes it as when he got out and he was 30, approaching his 31st birthday. He was a 17-year-old boy. He was basically a kid in the body of a man. I think that's how he puts it. And I spoke to John Spenceley, who was basically the reason behind Paul getting his boxing license in the first place. Him and Tommy Miller. And basically, one thing Paul didn't like was kind of older women. And he'd I know John's told me a few stories. There was this one woman called, I won't mention her name, and she was in a bar. She was working in a pub for John, and she was very snooty. And she had this boyfriend who was, again, I know his name, but I'm not going to mention him. He was a bit of a hard case in Middlesbrough. So Paul was actually selling Sweet Agony. It was at the time from behind the bar in off the park. And I know his flying's all safe. His flyers said come in off the park and buy him. So he, John had staff leaving. People would phone up and say, John, I want to come for a game of pool, a game of snooker, but there's that big man there. And, Paul would threaten all the bar staff saying, my mate John owns this pub. None of you are stealing off him. So this woman who was in her 40s or 50s or whatever, she was a bit mutton, dressed as lamb, very stuck up. Her boyfriend was very rich and he used to buy her a bottle of champagne. On a shift. So basically Paul come in and went, here, you get some work done, you fat cow, and all this, as Paul Sykes would. So inevitably the next day, this Middlesbrough hard man rang John Spenceley up going, I'm going to hose this fucking, I tell her I'm coming down. And John had to actually say, hang on a minute, this is Paul Sykes. This is literally the most dangerous prisoner in Britain. And the bloke kind of penny dropped and he was like, well, John, it's your club, you sort it. But going back to the book, because I do often get sidetracked, the book is, it's about Paul being released, 1977. And the experts say, criminologists, they say any man who's been institutionalized for 10 years is changed for the worst. Paul spent 13 years, very, very institutionalised. When he come out, he lived with John Spenceley for times. Although he was out of prison, his body clock was still in prison. He'd get up, he'd have to eat 3 times a day. He'd get irritable, if there was any noise after 8 o'clock. And and it's a book. It's about a man who, let's be honest, the prime years of his life, I put some footage of Paul Sykes sparring with Joe Fraser in 1973. And the reason was, these days as heavyweights, 6'8", 6'9", 7'2", all that. And back in them days, there was no huge heavyweights like there is now. And Joe Fraser came over here to fight Joe Bugner at, I think it was at White Hart Lane, 1973. So Sykes basically was used as a paid sparring partner for Smoking Joe. I think there's about 50 seconds on YouTube or maybe one of my social media pages. And he, you can, and this is the number one heavyweight in the world. I think if Paul was allowed to have went pro then when he was 26, 27, I think he could have won. He could have won, done something in boxing. Listen, when he fought Neville Mead in 1978, Neville Mead was a thunderous, murderous puncher. He was a bit like your modern day Wayne Alexander. He really knocked people cold. Out of his 20 wins, I think there was something like 18, but all by KO. He was an absolute murderous puncher. And Paul Sykes, Neville Mead hit Sykes that hard. Sykes actually done a U-turn, come back on himself. And this was the third round. Sykes very groggily just survived and basically come out and knock Neville Mead out. Neville Mead wasn't a champion then, but it just goes to show how impressive that was, because 3 years after Paul Sykes had knocked Neville Mead out, Neville Mead in, let me think, 1981, went and won the British title. So, and then he'd fought Tom Keeley's, who John Spencer said, listen, that guy, he was in the top 10 in Britain. Tom Keeley told me John L. Gardner avoided him. Tom Keeley from Brighton was just someone who would have made Muhammad Ali look bad. Southpaw, standing on your feet. He was just, and he basically was fast-tracked. To this day, Paul Sykes, here's a fact for you. Excuse me. When Audley Harrison went pro 20 years ago, he said, I will win the British title outright in 5 fights. So we all know what happened there, obviously, Audley Harrison. And basically, Paul Sykes fought for the British and the Commonwealth after 8 fights. I'm just trying to think. I know a few flyweights have done that because you don't need many bouts, flyweight. But that's still actually a record held today by Paul Sykes. The book, it's all about Paul's fight to adjust to civilization. He gets out of prison, goes back home, it's not a home anymore. Obviously, it's a Sykes family home, was 29 Gloucestershire Road. But Betty Sykes was literally, how can I put it? She was like a Del Boy. The house was just like a constant wholesale, fags, all this kind of things. And she worked on the market. Some things, she was given things, and she was very, very a shrewd old lady. Tough as old boots. Used to like a drink of whiskey, size 9 feet. She was, So I spoke to Kane. I'm not going to go into it. It's not my place to. But Paul. People think his dad was a monster, which he was. But I think it came from both sides, in my opinion. Someone very, very close to Paul said that the mother was emotionally detached. And even Kay said to me, she used to say some horrible things. But she knew how to make a pound note. So Paul basically came out and, tried there. They moved in with a lady called Elaine Beaumont, who allegedly, I think it's quite well known that she was a lady of the night. I spoke to police officers in Wakefield. I'm sure it even says it in this book, but many people will know. She only passed quite recently. And she was kind of, if you like, a female version of Paul. The story is in the book, actually. Paul's childhood friend Mick Sellers. They'd been out, which was it was a nightclub in Wakefield called Fish and Chips place, Eppie's. And basically they went home. Janet Sellers, Mick Sellers, Paul. Domestic started. Paul basically literally bit his best friend's ear off. That's in the book. I've spoke to people such as, I'm great friends with Paul's first wife, Pauline. She's a lovely, lovely lady. I've been to stay with her a few times. One of the best things, I suppose, about doing the Sykes projects is meeting Pauline, because she's a wonderful woman. And the start of the book, it says basically that she went into, I think it was Durham prison or some prison, with a knife, and she just said utter nonsense, absolute fabricated. And there's a bit in the book that Janet Sellers pulls Paul to one side and says, "I'm in love with you." Spoke to Janet as well. She gave an interview in very bravely as well, because I know it took a lot out of Janet, but she gave her side in further agony, and she just said it was complete and utter lies. I've spoke to a lot of people in prison with him. Spoke to Delroy Showers. I don't think I've ever met anyone as interesting as Delroy. Speaks 6 different languages. If you could imagine, I probably repeat myself all the time if anyone's watching his podcast, but if you could imagine kind of Derek Lord from Big Brother and Chris Eubank becoming a criminal, or together, then Delroy's a mixture. He's an education to be in his company. And he said to me, in this book, this is not my words, it's in this book, that Delroy liked fair-haired young boys. Delroy's a very open person, and he's he's probably, this is not for me to say, but a lot of them things in that book, Paul never really went. Paul would talk about it, but Paul's indulged in certain things that he didn't actually say, yeah, well, I actually did that as well. So there is a few lies in that book. I'm quite confident. I spoke to lots and lots of people. Spoke to people. There's a few in there. Actually, names have been changed, but listen, it's a great piece, and it's only as I've read it now twice, and I often pick it up and I flick through it. I think this is the 3rd edition. So if you have a look at the back, this was Paul Sykes, 77, early 77, Don King and Larry Holmes. Now, this might sound a tall story, but this just goes to show how fast-track Paul Sykes was. Because if he'd have beaten John L. Gardner that night at Wembley Arena in, I've just got the date, June 79, he would have been British title, but he said he wouldn't accept the Lord Queensberry belt. He said he wouldn't accept it. And then he was going to be set to face Leon Spinks, who'd won the Olympics in 78. Paul actually was paid to go over and spar with Michael Spinks, Leon Spinks, and a very young Thomas Hearns. Heard all them stories from a guy who went over on the trip. And if he'd have beaten Leon Spinks, then he would have been due to face Larry Holmes. Now, I know this is all pie in the sky, and imagine if the dinosaurs were still here, and imagine if King Kong caught all the airplanes. But that was actually the plan. I've went back in the archives and I've read bits from Manny Goodall, Tommy Miller, the people behind Paul, and they said, listen, it's not like today when heavyweights can turn over at 30 really, because of the conditioning, the anabolic steroids, all these kind of legal things. The body's changed, where 40 years ago you were classed as an old man. I mean, one of John L. Gardner's favourite things, I think he was 7 years younger than Paul, 6.5 maybe. And everything he said to Paul was, you're an old man, and and you're going to get found out. I've watched a fight with John L. Gardner, and basically John said he was the bully and a bully gets found out and turned his back on him. I can't argue with that. You've seen the fight. The fight itself was 50-50 for 3 rounds. And if you watch that fight, I think I've watched a fight 20 times. And I think I've only ever seen Paul Sykes throw one body shot. And that was because he was loading up. Every punch was basically for bad intentions, to take John Gardner's head off, his Kevin Keegan haircut. And John said to me, he said he certainly curled his toes up, which is an expression I suppose you can't really grasp unless you've boxed or you've been punched with a boxing glove on. But yeah, it's a book on his career, and everyone talks about the shame, the notoriety, the negativity, the bad light that Paul Sykes brought to the city of Wakefield. But for a short spell, from 1977 to March 1980, he was that 3 years, almost 3 years. He basically put Wakefield on the map. And his fights, he was a phenomenal ticket seller. He was basically what you call a promoter's dream. He'd literally, which was a lot in them days. I mean, the Wakefield Theatre, it's not there anymore now. And he would literally sell it out himself. I'm talking like 700-800 tickets, and barristers used to go and watch him, prison officers. A lot of people would go and watch him, hoping for him to get beat, but they all bought the ticket. And it's a book. Listen, it's 30-year-old this year, this book, and I don't think it will ever go away. It won the Koestler Award. Anyone doesn't know what the Arthur Koestler Award is? You've got to be in prison to win it. I think Paul's reward for writing such a piece was £15. Which I imagine it's been quite a lot of money when you were probably on £2.50 a week in 30 years ago. And I think, something? I think a lot's been said before, but I think that maybe Paul Sykes' greatest ever crime was only ever doing the one book. Now, I've spoke to people. I know he started the Leopards of Mablethorpe. I don't believe that was finished. I know certain people say they have it. I spoke to a lady who I won't name. She kindly took Paul in off the streets, and she's in one of the books actually, and she said, yeah, he, when he was in 2005, 2004, he used to do would he'd basically con tablets off her. He used to have these tablets called amitriptyline, and sometimes she would give him placebos, basically pretend tablets, because there was a little times in his life when he actually couldn't drink, when he what's it called? Them pellets. What George Best had. I know George Best had a new liver and then he knackered himself. But Paul had them pellets inserted in his stomach where if you have a sip of alcohol and you violently throw up. So he had them. So he tried everything. And it was very sad because on his deathbed, he turned to someone who was there and he said, "It's got me, hasn't it?" He said, "The drink's killed me." So he knew. Obviously, then he fell into a coma for 6 days and never regained consciousness. But yeah, listen, guys, this book, I didn't think much of it at first. And I got to know the full story. I walked in the documentary, I walked in that book, and I met all the characters. And it's a piece of artwork. Mentions Middlesbrough quite a bit actually. I'm just he's mentions the Wellington pub in Middlesbrough, mentions John Spenceley. I've actually seen a copy signed to John Spenceley from Paul, and it said, "To the greatest man I ever met." So John Spenceley did do a lot for Paul. Tommy Miller done a lot for Paul. But I would advise you, if anyone's seen, I mean, it's been viewed now millions of times, and the reason it keeps getting took off is ITV, because when the film and the documentary go next year, ITV know they can charge £400 per second, so it keeps getting put on YouTube, but then it keeps getting taken off. But, a lot of people just know Paul Sykes is that kind of crazy guy who talks about punching sharks. But if you want to know the real in-depth story about it, you must read Sweet Agony. And then, of course, there's a fella called Jamie Boyle who followed it up with Unfinished Agony. I'm going to do videos on them later, so we'll 50 people on that, and then Further Agony, and the very recent Sykes Final Agony. So yeah, listen guys, if you want to get the book's gonna the documentary is gonna be COVID permitted. I know we were supposed to start in September this year. Film is going to be made in Wakefield, Pontefract and Leeds when it happens. Western Edge are really excited about it. Von Civil's just read Final Agony, thrilled. He said it's a fabulous addition to the script. Script's already been written. Paul's already been picked. Very handsome guy, bit of a heartthrob, well known on the television, that's all I can say. And they're talking, I know they were negotiating with probably the most popular 80s band to do the soundtrack. So that is all going to start next year, hopefully COVID permitted. Yeah, and then, it's like Lenny McLean a few years back, they brought the film out and then they brought the documentary out. So how good is it going to be? I don't know. I know the budget they're talking about is 2 million, which is, it's not to be sniffed at. But if anybody really wants to really fully understand, listen, I'm not glorifying Paul Sykes. He did a lot of wicked, monstrous things. There's words. I think I said it the other week. There's an example, an exaggeration that if I tell you a million times, stop exaggerating. Now, if Paul Sykes did any bad ever in his entire life, believe me, that guy got paid back 1,000 times. Eggs smashed on his head. Kids used to ask him to shadowbox for £1. Humiliate him, he'd sleep in doorways, everyone's daddy would beat up or the granddad. Karma come back on him, and life's got a funny way of repaying you, hasn't it? But yeah, to anybody out there who's fascinated with the whole Paul Sykes saga, project, whatever you want to call it, you can buy that now on Amazon, eBay, Waterstones, and that's £12.95. That is the iconic cult classic Sweet Agony. And any greedy bastards out there who don't want to pay £12.95, you can buy it for £4.95 via Kindle. That gets straight put to your device. And then once you've read that, I'm sure you want to read Sykes Unfinished Agony, Sykes Further Agony, and then Sykes Final Agony. And also, if to any, I suppose, hardcore, my friend, I suppose, business partner, there's a book there called It's Sharks, and that's by Rob Brenton, and that's a lot of comical escalades Paul got up to, a lot of crazy journeys. I think the book's called It's Sharks, Paul Sykes and the Straits of Johor. You can get them all on Amazon, guys. And listen, I've got a lot to thank Paul Sykes for, because I left school with no education at all, complete waste of time. Bounced about from jobs, from being a doorman to forklift driver and security. as the anything, labourer, whatever. And I watched this documentary, and I was just like, wow. And I, you know, for 3 years, I was just like, I wish someone would write a book. And then basically 2015, I just said, here, hold my beer. And I walked in, took my jacket off, walked in centre of Wakefield and just did it myself. And here I am now, you know, 18 books on Amazon and nearly 3 documentaries, you know, and that's all because of Paul Sykes, my interest. When I stopped writing books on the Sykes, I was like, oh, what do we do now? You know, and it was like, so yeah, it's he's certainly done a lot. You know, listen, I never met the guy. I had never even heard of him until he'd been dead 5 years. And you know, one thing I do know is if I would have never have watched Paul Sykes at Large or read Sweet Agony, I wouldn't have written a book in my life. I wouldn't have wanted to. You know, so yeah, and it's funny actually because I was speaking to Kenny the tailor, the elderly gentleman in the documentary. He's still about. He's still. I'm pleased to say he's in good health. I'm just trying to think. I interviewed him 3 years ago, and he was 85, so he'll be about 88 now. And he's the guy. If you don't know, Paul Sykes walked in the documentary. He went,